look at human rights. And when I was in graduate school,
Hmm.
I learned that, as a human rights major, I actually couldn't focus on the United States. I had to
Hmm.
look at other countries. Yes. So that was,
Okay.
yeah. So I got around that by doing a bunch of comparative studies where I
Hmm.
would compare the US with South Africa, compare the US with India, compare whatever. And really started noticing that violence against women is treated as an unavoidable collateral damage.
Okay.
And it's
Hmm.
very uniform everywhere. It and that the systems to respond to harm are for men. They were written by men, they're designed by men, and they respond to harm for men. And
Uh-huh.
it's in a way that, especially for BIPOC women, um, a lot of domestic violence is responded to with state violence. And that's
Right.
where
Right.
looking at how exactly does this work, and it was in the United States definitely through the prison industrial complex,
Hmm.
criminalize women being harmed and then seeking help. And that
Hmm.
is what, you know, it was outrageous, but it was also something I saw in
Hmm.
my family and saw in my community, and wanted to look at what's really going on here, and
Hmm.
started doing some systems change work.
Hmm. Now, for those of you who may not know, BIPOC is Black Indigenous people of color. So we like to start with the basics here because we
Yes.
have people who are, hungry and thirsty for knowledge from all walks of life, from everywhere. And we don't want to make it seem like, you have to already be on this level of knowledge before you can really take this conversation in. So I just wanted to highlight that really quickly for those of you who are just now joining us on Instagram. On Facebook, I'm here with Christina Dawkins, and we're talking about how we can encourage students to use creative expression as a form of activism. So let's just jump right into it. In the social justice space, the term abolitionist describes someone with a very specific mission and vision for their work. But I would imagine that a lot of our viewers haven't heard that term outside of academia or their basic level historic class or the historical context of abolitionist movement and slavery, not
Yes.
modern. We'll talk about modern day slavery and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, but in slavery as they know it. So can you explain to us what an abolitionist is and what the modern day abolitionist movement is about? And
Sure.
I know that's a loaded question. So
Yeah, so basically, the abolition movement, when we think about slavery, when I'm saying we, I'm saying, generally in the United States, when we think about slavery, we're thinking about antebellum chattel
mm-hmm,
slavery. And that is
mm-hmm,
slavery based on a trait that you have. And the trait in the United States was being of African descent.
right.
So that's chattel slavery. And the 13th Amendment abolished slavery except as punishment for a crime. And
Okay.
it's that clause that was added to the 13th Amendment that we don't really focus on. That
Okay.
the 13th Amendment ended slavery. It did not. It ended chattel slavery and changed it to slavery based on if you've been convicted for a crime.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
what happened immediately after that was what was called convict leasing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where
Okay.
black folks would just be picked up for jaywalking, for, loitering, for, all of these sort
Mm-hmm.
of crimes that white folks were not being arrested for,
Except for. Okay.
and then would be leased out to
Uh-huh.
continue the work that they were doing as enslaved
Before,
Africans.
right.
Yes. And so there's
Wow.
this, it's morphed over time
Mm-hmm.
into, broken windows policing and stop and frisk, and if you
Mm-hmm.
have crack you get 40 times the sentence if you have cocaine, and all of
Mm-hmm.
these different ways to continue the history of slavery and profiting off of
Mm-hmm.
people in captivity in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So abolition is really just recognizing that today in the United States, there are more people living under modern day slavery than there were at the height of the transatlantic slave trade.
Mm-hmm. What?
That's
That's true. Yeah.
that's the system
Yeah.
we have. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So it's over 2 million people are incarcerated. There's another 6 million who are on parole or probation. And then we've expanded mass incarceration to immigrant detention, where people
Mm-hmm.
are being locked up for trying to seek their human rights to
Mm-hmm.
seek asylum in the country of their choosing, their
Mm-hmm.
human right to move and have self determination,
Mm-hmm.
because we're only criminalizing movement from certain countries, right?
Right. Right.
It's from Nicaragua, right?
Right.
It's not from European countries,
Right.
and then human trafficking relies on criminalizing victims.
Mm-hmm.
That's just what people get cycled in and out, and if you start identifying someone as a criminal, then they
Mm-hmm.
believe that they are, and it makes it that much harder to get out of an abusive human trafficking situation. So all of
Right.
these things intersect, rely on each other, and they're based in criminalization.
Okay. So and I've never had anybody explain it that way. So that makes a lot more sense. And I'm sure that it's making a lot more sense to our viewers. What we're really looking at is an extension of abolitionist work from chattel slavery to the modern day form of slavery, which is through punitive measures for
Yeah,
what is seemingly criminal activity.
yeah,
And and people talk about prison industrial complex, people talk about over policing and all of those things. Those are things that are top of mind, but we have to understand. I would like for our viewers to understand that you know the criminalization of certain things is different based on where you live, who you're talking to, what the population of that area is, the race of the people who are being accused,
yeah,
even the and I want you to speak to even the judicial process is different for those people,
absolutely.
correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. A
yeah,
lot of people are simply in jail because they can't afford bail,
right,
and
yeah,
that's not that has nothing to do with safety. It is only to do with capitalism, only to do with profit and money.
mm,
And when the only criteria for you going home for a year to wait trial or being locked up for a year is, do you have $10,000? Like that's not, how is that a system of justice? It's not.
right.
It's a system
It's about
of
money,
capitalism and profiting off of
right?
folks. So
Wow.
and I should say, I teach in prison, and
Uh-huh.
this is where a lot of the practical, what does this look like on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
information for me comes from. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've had a student who was spent a year in Rikers because he matched a description and then was released
Right.
because they didn't have any, but he's just was locked up for a year, and that was a high school student. That, really, it's not, being locked up in a violent place for a year has long lasting effects. So yeah.
Right. That's just, and we could talk about this for on and on and on and on
Yes.
and on for hours. We have to have you back to talk about this at some point to our viewers. But I do want to move on to the next question, which is people hear activist. I'm an activist. This is
Mm.
activism. This is, you know, what I'm hearing is that, you know, as an abolitionist, is that a form of activism? Is it different than activism? Is activism considered something totally different? How do you look at those two, and how do they, connect, or are they together at all?
Yeah. I think activism is a very broad term, and um, I, I think I've heard lots of different definitions. Like, one is, you're taking an action to affect your society. And
Okay.
that's, you're taking a position, you're taking a stance, and you're trying to bring about social change. And
Uh-huh.
that would be activism.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think now it's sort of, you retweet something and you're an activist.
You're that
and
right, exactly.
and so, yeah, I think there's other words like organizer and ally, and
Mm-hmm.
all of these different things to kind of uh, to give some more meat to the word activism. But I actually don't think it's a terrible thing for someone to say they're an activist, because if you're taking action to
Mm-hmm.
bring about social change,
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, then you're doing something. And I
Mm-hmm.
would encourage people to want to be active participants in bringing about something positive.
Right.
When it comes to abolition, it's uh, it's a political stance,
Okay.
recognizing that slavery is very much in existence,
Okay.
and recognizing that it's in existence because of the current systems that we have.
Okay.
So um, I think the big difference is abolitionists are not reformists. We're not trying to fix a broken system. We're recognizing that the system is working exactly
Mm-hmm.
as it's supposed to work, and that
Mm-hmm.
is the problem.
Right.
Like, the
Right.
problem is it's
Okay.
working, and we don't need to change it. We need a new one.
Mm-hmm.
Because this whole, modern day policing, prisons, the judicial system, it all grew out of chattel slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And so at its root, it's going to continue doing what it is, which is locking up people for, I mean, the system isn't just racist, isn't just anti black.
Mm-hmm.
It's racist, it's classist, it's ableist,
Mm-hmm.
it's,
Mm.
it's, you see patriarchy in here. It's very difficult for, I mean, a lot of 86% of black women who are incarcerated are survivors of domestic violence. So it's
Wow.
it's patriarchal. Like, it's
Right.
deeply
To your point
patriarchal.
earlier about,
Yeah.
the yeah, you get into the cycle as a victim of the cycle.
Yes.
Like, how does that work? As a victim, now you have gotten into this cycle of, modern day slavery, or undue incarceration, or, unjust incarceration, but you were the victim
Yep.
at the start of it. That's just, wow. That's extremely disheartening. You said 86% of black
86.
women. Wow.
Yeah. And in
Wow.
my classrooms, it's usually 100%. Like, that's who's sitting around chalking.
Right. Right.
Everybody. And yeah. And I always have someone who is incarcerated and was trafficked. And, like,
Mm-hmm.
that's known. It was known by the judge. It was known, but they're incarcerated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, they also used an illegal drug that their trafficker introduced to them. It's
Mm-hmm.
like,
Right.
it doesn't matter when you see that they're a victim of something. It's still lock them up. That's
Mm-hmm.
what we're doing.
Right. Right. That kind of, I think we kind of, one of the questions that I had coming up was, we talk about this in the lens of racial justice, but it's bigger. Like, it
Yes.
spans across all types of oppressive systems, and people who are caught up in different oppressive systems are sucked into this, this modern day slavery.
Yeah.
People who, are losing their gender equity rights, their immigration protection,
Mm-hmm.
their right to, the LGBTQIA community, their rights, and they're being
Mm-hmm.
sucked into this. So it's not just about racial justice, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
That was the impetus of it. But now, kind of, a lot of people who are in marginalized communities are being pulled into that. So you do a lot of teaching, you do a lot of work around this, but you're also a visual storyteller. So I'm imagining that, with your teaching and the stories you hear, the people you work with, the people you help, you get a lot of, um, content. Is not, because content is such a social media word, but you get a lot that comes in that you want to come out through a creative
Yeah.
outlet. So visual storytelling, I want to start with that, because, like I said, we start with basics. What does it mean to be a visual storyteller,
Yeah.
and what are
So
some of the elements of visual storytelling that make it impact?
So basically, when I started looking into integrating more visual storytelling into the work that I did, it was a recognition that we give such primacy to the written word,
Mm-hmm.
and that is just one limited form of communication and understanding and intelligence, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're sort of like
Mm.
giving,
Yeah.
it's like if you have trouble reading, if you're dyslexic, if you or whatever, it's in school, it's just read. It's just literacy.
Mm-hmm.
It's the words on the page, and I think we lose a lot in that. Um, I also think when we're dealing with something that is um, sort of like at a meta level, the
Mm-hmm.
arts help understand what's happening. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think there is a solely this was another thing that came out in grad school. It was just like we're trying to take a very academic approach to things that are deeply personal
Personal. Yeah.
and that are just like this is we're human beings, we're storytelling beings. Like the oldest stories that we have on record are pictures. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is how we communicate. This is
Visual. Yeah.
natural. Yeah. So let's not hide that. Let's
Mm-hmm.
embrace it and see what comes out. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think with visual storytelling, it can be drawings. It can also be like systems mapping. I do. If you go on my website, there's a systems map of the sexual abuse to prison pipeline
Mm-hmm.
in the United States, and it's a way to understand things visually. One,
Mm-hmm.
if you're a visual learner, this is your game. Like,
Mm-hmm.
try
Right.
this instead of reading it. But it also just has a more holistic picture
Mm-hmm.
because the linear way that we write just does not speak to our experience. That's not how we
Mm-hmm.
move in the world. That's not
Right.
how we take in information in like this
Mm-hmm.
linear written form. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really just bringing more in, and I think it enriches the experience. And you know, I have a little video on my like YouTube channel, which has like 3 videos. I barely make anything, but I talk about storytelling because like the facts and figures that people kind of give more weight to
Uh-huh.
are actually a bunch of stories where people just picked out one element
Uh-huh.
and quantified
Right.
it, and it's like,
Right.
well, we lost all of the context when we
Mm-hmm.
just look at this one data point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, let's bring this back in, let's make this deeply human, let's connect. And I think it brings about better understanding and then
Mm-hmm.
better responses.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. I love that. I love that point about, you know, reading the written word limits the
Yes.
audience. If you can't read, whether you can't because you have never learned, whether you can't because you're not old enough, whether you
Mm-hmm.
can't because you don't like it, whether you can't, like it limits who you can communicate with.
Yeah.
And that's just such a injustice when we're talking about dance or art or any type of visual art form,
Yeah.
that we can be able, as dancers, we can communicate with people of all ages and
Yeah.
all intelligence levels and all reading levels or non-reading levels or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's so beautiful to think about that. And you're right, like it's always, can you read, what's your literacy level, what is it, why aren't we measuring what the arts acumen, the artful communication level is? Why are we
Yes.
not measuring that level of literacy in our students as we
Right.
as we see them coming up, which is what this is really about. So a lot of our viewers do teach children and adolescents, and we want to help them learn to better communicate, because right now in the I work a lot in the competitive dance world. I judge, I teach, I do all that type of stuff. And it's about, okay, we do a dance and we go and we get judged by it and they tell us what we did wrong and they give us an award. But I would love to have this competitive dance world really maintain the element of, what story did you tell these people
Mm-hmm.
who
Yeah.
watched? Yeah, you got an award and that's great, but did you touch someone in the audience with what it is that you said
Yeah.
with your body? So what do you think are the best practices for helping our students communicate their feelings about the issues that are happening in their personal lives, in the world,
Yeah.
through visual storytelling?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're sort of putting something in your body first can often be a better way to express what you're feeling. And I
Mm-hmm.
think when we look at everything that's happened in the world, like, kids are taking that in.
Mm-hmm.
They're not understanding everything the same way that we are, but they're definitely taking it in. And so what what I think is so beautiful about dance and arts and painting and all of these things is that you can actually like put it in your body first and then
Mm-hmm.
look at yourself. Like, you can learn how you're feeling and what you want to express by first trying to put it to dance or to music or to song or
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you know see where that came from as a
Mm-hmm.
starting point to articulate it, because I think
Mm-hmm.
if kids can express concern about something,
Mm-hmm.
then they're old enough to learn about it on their terms of like,
Right.
I don't
Development,
know.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It-
I mean, they're affected by it for sure.
right. So that goes into my next question. So if they're affected by it, you think that regardless of what age, there is an appropriate way to have them express it through visual arts or creativity in that way. So it's never an age that's too
Absolutely.
young. If you're impacted by it, I can tell you as a day, or I can guide you and lead you as a dance educator to how to communicate that,
Yeah.
not with written word or even spoken word, but with actual movement. So it's not an age that's too young.
I I think it's it's important to start as soon as they can recognize that something's happening, because if
Mm-hmm.
I think especially for folks who want to take allyship seriously, which is, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
recognizing your power, privilege, positionality, and saying, you know, I'm not, you know, directly persecuted by this, but I'm going to take an action. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
be an ally. I'm going to show up in a way that I can show up and make
Mm-hmm.
it important. And I think if you don't respond, then the lesson that kids are learning is that this doesn't have to affect me. This is affecting
Mm-hmm.
other people. And
Mm-hmm.
that's, if we start to teach from the very young age that what's
Mm-hmm.
out in society affects you, that you need to care about everybody, that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
this person looks different from you, but it's the same, which kids are really ready to accept in a way that
Mm-hmm.
adults are, it's
Are
harder to
not.
get that through.
Right. Right. The adults
But
are the
yeah.
problem. Yeah,
Absolutely.
the adults are the problem. They're in the
Yeah.
way of a lot of this. And I think that if we could get out of the way, kids will tell us how they want to do
Absolutely, and they're going to tell us that they care, that they
it.
see
Mm-hmm.
this and they don't like what they're seeing,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is so important. And with, I think especially, so like child trafficking, child sex
Mm-hmm.
trafficking is it's a big problem in the United States. It's a bigger problem than a lot of folks recognize. But yeah, the U.S. is a major hub for human trafficking all over the
Mm-hmm.
world, and it's not about crossing state lines. I mean, it's really uh, terrible. And when I tell parents this, they're like, "Well, what can we tell our kids?" And no matter how old you are, you can always teach your kid, like, your body belongs to you. If someone
Mm-hmm.
touches you and you feel uncomfortable, you come tell us. You should never keep an adult secret. Like, you know,
Mm-hmm. Right.
you can do these things. And
Mm-hmm.
so if that's important, then you can talk to them about these other issues that are also
Right.
important,
Right.
and start at a young age.
Right. And I think that, as an artist, and we can talk about this because did you say your background's theater?
Yes.
Was it yes. So your
Yeah.
background's in theater. I think that I would love your opinion on this. We need to listen to what kids are saying more closely and through their art. So we get a
Mm.
child who draws something. When you look at that, you need to look at it more than, oh, they drew a happy face and a sun and a like, what is that? What did that child really just draw? When you get a student who's doing improvisation in a dance class, how did he or she really just move? What
Mm-hmm.
did that mean? What did that look like? Does
Yeah.
that come, does it, I guess, does it unconsciously, subconsciously come out of people in that way, do you think? Especially children.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think the encouraging our creative expression
Mm-hmm.
is going to encourage them to be healthier, is going
Mm-hmm.
to just like to communicate and to process, because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been doing this work for over 15 years now. Sometimes I don't have the words to
Mm-hmm.
express, you know, what I'm doing. Like, I'll need to go for a walk, or I like to paint. I do, you know, other things, and to make that, to do it and then look at it and say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
what am I saying here? What am I
Mm-hmm.
processing? What's going on? Is a way to teach emotional intelligence that's going to better serve them
Mm-hmm.
than, you know, resume writing skills or whatever.
Right,
you
right,
know.
whatever it is, right. Right, right.
Yeah.
Uh, I want to definitely get this in before the end of the show, and it'll probably take us a little bit of time to walk through this. So, your wealth of knowledge and program development, curriculum design, you've done it. You have a lot of experience in it, and I know that there are studio owners, company directors, and dance educators who want a program around taking action, who want
Yeah.
a program around activism, and develop curriculum, or even just single class lesson plans. But I do want to go back to, we talked about allyship a little bit earlier. Like, how do
Mm-hmm.
you, because there's not a lot of representation
Yeah.
of BIPOC people in the dance world. So I think you kind of have to be careful as you're developing programs and as you're developing curriculum. So what are some considerations that they might take before they take that first step? Like, what do I need
Yeah.
to think about before I start this program to make sure that it's impactful and it's serving who it needs to serve?
Yeah. Well, I think the first step for anybody doing program design is to examine your own power, position, and privilege. Like, how do you relate to this subject, whatever you're trying to incorporate into the dance studio? Good, but you gotta examine yourself and figure out exactly where you are in this work. And then the second step would be to collaborate. Nothing, there's no need to try to make up something brand new. Like,
Right.
there's so many consultants, there's so many organizations, there's so many, different, so many different ways to do this work really well. And I think it's important to do it well. So, you know, examine yourself and find a collaborator, find someone who can offer some guidance. And yeah, it's valuable. So put that work into it.
How important is it that the person that you find to collaborate, that you find help from, is from the impacted community that you have a passion or connection to? So if you are looking at developing a program and you want to encourage your students to, express their feelings about racial justice issues,
Hmm.
how important is it that your collaborator be someone from the BIPOC community?
I mean, I would say very important.
Mm-hmm.
If representation matters and you want to be inclusive, then
Mm-hmm.
why not take an opportunity to do that? To
Mm-hmm.
like
Right.
make your space more diverse, more representative, more inclusive, and then you have a partner, a collaborator, somebody
Mm-hmm.
that you've brought into the space.
Right.
I think that's part of being an ally. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm speaking of this mainly from an immigrant rights perspective, is to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that I am not taking up space from someone directly impacted. Like,
Right.
if I will do things like show up to hearings, do protests, because if you're undocumented, you're much more vulnerable if you get arrested. If you're
Mm-hmm.
at a hearing, at a whatever. I try to find ways to show up that use the privilege I do have as a citizen,
Mm-hmm.
to be helpful. But I also don't want to take up space on a panel if someone who's undocumented wants to speak. You know,
Right.
like,
Right.
this is an opportunity for me to make room, and
Uh-huh.
that is allyship as well.
Right.
So really looking at who's marginalized, and how can I leverage my position to bring them to the center.
Mm-hmm. To go back to your point earlier, in this section, looking at yourself first,
Hmm.
do you find that in working with people that you're working with to be the hardest step for a lot of people before they dive into this?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a lot,
yeah,
got to be a lot of conviction around that, and you have to move past that before you can go forward, right?
yeah, yeah. And I think it's recognize, but it's also, I've made lots of mistakes. I teach inside, and once there was a there was a cricket outbreak at Rikers. So they were just like,
Cricket.
yeah, they're crickets.
What is
They're just
cricket?
like
Oh, like cricket, like the actual
the bugs.
the bug. Okay.
Yeah, there's just,
Okay.
I don't know. There's just like crickets everywhere, and so you'd like walk down to go teach, and there would just be like, you'd hear like the chirping or whatever sound they make. And then so the girls were telling me, oh yeah, the exterminator's coming, and I was like, oh no, they're gonna kill all the crickets. And it was just like, in that moment, I forgot that I get to leave after like three
Right.
hours.
Right.
And
And you're
boy,
worried
did they
about
let me
dead
down. Yeah, I
crickets, right?
know.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it was just like, that was me stepping out of line, me not remembering my position in this space.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grateful for my students who were very much like, no, we hate the crickets, we can't sleep, blah blah blah. And I was just like, yeah, you're right, I should not have said that. you
Right.
know and it's learning, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, otherwise, I mean, what are you, don't engage because you might,
Mess
make an
up. And
idiot of
that's a
yourself
lot
for a
of
little
people.
bit.
Yeah.
Eh, that's
Right.
life.
Right. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think that's such a, I'm so glad you brought that up, and that's such a great example, because I think that is why a lot of people don't engage in this
yeah,
type of work, in especially with their students. When you're dealing with students, you got parents, and once
yep.
again, the adults are the problem. We go back to the adults being the problem in this situation, where you're like, okay, this kid wants to talk about. I mean, they're jazzed. you have brought up, how do you feel about fill in the blank issue? And
Yep.
they are on it, and they go home and they're excited. Mom, dad, grandpa, adult that is mine. We did an improv about my feelings about fill in blank. And the next thing you know, they are email warriors. You don't talk to my kid about this, and you don't, and
Yeah.
that's my place. And I just, I don't understand how do you suggest dealing with that, I guess. If you are in the space where you are getting confronted or you're getting pushback or someone's saying you're being divisive or, these
Mhm.
issues don't need to be shared with children or that's not that's not appropriate. What advice do you give to
Yeah.
somebody who's really convicted about wanting to do a program like
Yeah.
this?
What I advise for a lot of folks who are like first entering the space is look at your mission, vision, values statement. Like
Mm-hmm.
create what are your community agreements? What
Mm-hmm.
create a statement on diversity. Like, first articulate what your values are. If you're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, then it's this is what we say we're about.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not, this isn't being divisive, this is upholding our stated
Right.
values. And I would just encourage people to to fight for that because
Mm-hmm.
the arts is so powerful and it's such a rich history of activism
Mm-hmm.
and and moving people and
Mm-hmm.
really connecting across language and religion and nationality and that's there's a powerful form of expression that you're engaging in with your work and to
Mm-hmm.
maybe just stand on the shoulders of folks who've come before you and just
Mm-hmm.
stay with that fight because it's
Mm-hmm.
worth having.
Mm-hmm. To your point with the crickets and just the the moment where you realize that was a really insensitive comment
Yes.
when
Yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
I think about who I'm talking to and in this space. That apology is just a terrifying moment for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But how important is that apology? Like a lot of people like to gloss it over and put their head in the sand like an ostrich.
Right.
How important is that apology when you have made a blunder like
I I think learning how to apologize is something that is a skill that will take you really far. And when I studied transitional justice and sort of like post mass atrocities. What do you do? And the elements of an apology are to acknowledge wrongdoing, take accountability, say you're sorry, and make a promise of non repetition.
that?
Like
Mm-hmm.
those are the elements of a good apology. And
Mm,
so often we hear these apologies where it's like, oh, I'm sorry you misunderstood me. Or
mm-hmm.
I'm sorry if you took that the wrong way. Neither of these things are apologies. Like
Mm,
you're not owning anything. You're not taking accountability and you're not taking steps to repair the relationship. And that's what the apology is for. It's to
mm-hmm.
repair broken trust, hurt feelings. It's to bring you back into right relationship with that
Mm-hmm.
person who you've just harmed. And so if
Mm-hmm.
that's the goal, if the goal isn't, oh, I don't want to look like I'm racist, I don't want to look like I screwed up, I don't want to look insensitive, you're going to miss the mark. If the goal
Right.
is, I want, I value our relationship, I want it to be
Mm-hmm.
trusting, I want it to be healthy,
Mm-hmm.
then I got to own it. I was just like, you
Mm-hmm.
know what? Definitely shouldn't have said that. You're totally right. Sorry about that. And really, it was over. No, nothing was brought up again
Right.
because it's in
Right.
the moment. You're just let's repair this, and
Mm-hmm.
and also listen, right?
Right.
They got to express their frustration about that,
Mm-hmm.
and just take it,
Mm-hmm.
But if the apology is muddied with all of these excuses and explanations and but this and this is why, who does that serve? What
Mm-hmm.
purpose is that? And then
Right.
decide, okay, so then maybe it shouldn't be in there. I can just leave it out.
Right. Right. So we like to give homework here at Beyond. All of our viewers that watch, we like to give them one action that they should take between now and next week to make progress in this area. So what would be the one thing that you would tell our viewers, like how do we make one step that we can take between now and next Friday on encouraging our students to use their creative outlet to express themselves in this way?
Okay. So I have one thing that I tell everybody to do, which is
Mm-hmm.
to make sure you're divested from human captivity. Like
Okay.
over 20 million people have investments into prisons and jails and ways that people are held captive for profit.
Okay.
And the link that I shared in the chat is a way
Uh-huh.
that you can check and divest, hopefully,
Huh.
from that. Yeah, most people have no idea. It's like wrapped up into some retirement fund or whatever, but
Wow.
over 20 million people in the US have direct investments into prisons.
Uh-huh.
So um, that's one thing. And another thing I would say is like over the course of the week, be attentive to narrative and what stories are being told, how is someone being described, what words
Uh-huh.
are being used. And I like to, I've done this exercise in a theater class, but I think it works with dancers,
Mm-hmm.
to sort of walk in the way that a word says. So like convict or
Mm-hmm.
felon,
Mm-hmm.
walk across a space like that.
Like that.
And then walk across a space as a formerly incarcerated person, as a
Mm.
currently incarcerated person, and then like
Mm-hmm.
what does that look like? Walk across a space as an asylum seeker versus
Mm-hmm.
an illegal. Like
Mm-hmm.
what does that put on you? What does that put
Mm-hmm.
in you?
Mm-hmm.
And really just try that on so that we can start using human first language.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to facilitate a lot of connection and movement toward justice, through that empathy, because we are humans first.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of ways that people are dehumanized in the language we use.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about human first language? What does
Yeah.
human first mean?
So human first is where you're looking at a word that sort of takes away the humanity of someone, and
Mm-hmm.
you're choosing to see the person first. So, like drug addict, it's
Mm-hmm.
person with a drug dependency.
Mm.
You
Okay.
know, it's like put the person in there. And so yeah, convict, felon, it's currently or formerly incarcerated person.
Uh-huh.
Illegal immigrant is an undocumented person or a
Uh-huh.
person seeking asylum or refuge.
Uh-huh.
Like these are people, and we keep finding these terms that dehumanize people, much in the same way that enabled chattel slavery to
Uh-huh.
last for as long as it did.
Uh-huh. So as we're talking about these programs, developing program and developing curricula, we really need to be focused on that human first language.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, embodying that narrative, understanding what it feels like
Yeah.
to be labeled in that way is definitely a consideration I hear for our homework. And then also working on this human first language and really centering the population we're talking about and using our empathetic ears and eyes and hearts to actually better understand where those people are.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Awesome. That's wonderful. I think those are things that we can do.
Right.
Peeps out there, I think that is homework that we definitely can do. I do want to go ahead and drop in our chats here our homework that we give you every week. Please take the steps module. The steps module is totally, totally, totally free. And it is a learning module that was developed by Apollo Performance in COVID years. Some of the great things that came out of COVID. And it is totally free. It has modules on anti-racism, gender equity, inclusion, sex abuse prevention, nutrition, psychology, dance, medicine, and science. Just a wealth of knowledge for everybody, and that's totally free. You can find that on the Apollo website. Also, our friends at YPAD give us 25% off of all of their courses. So make sure that you check them out as well. Christina, how can people find you, reach you?
Easiest way is my website. It's a4abolitionist.com, and it's the number
Uh-huh.
four. And then the website has my email, and I'm on Twitter at a4abolitionist,
Mm-hmm.
and also on LinkedIn. So
Mm-hmm.
happy to stay in touch.
And you do consultancy. So would you do consultancy for people in this industry who might be looking to develop programs?
Oh, absolutely. I
Okay.
work with arts and education
Okay.
organizations. So, yep.
Okay. Wonderful. We'll definitely reach out to Christina. I've dropped in the chat her Twitter, her LinkedIn, and her website. So you can definitely find her and reach out to her. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for agreeing to be with us today. It's been very, very insightful, I hope, for our viewers. And I know it has been for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This was fun.
Good. Next week, we will be back at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to talk about how we can hold our convention and competitions accountable for making changes that keep our kids safe. As we all know, the dance industry has been racked with scandal around inappropriate and misconduct of adults with children, and a lot of predatory behavior that is happening in our convention on our convention circuits. And I think it's time that we talk about how we actually pull together, organize, and take do activist activity to make sure that they are held accountable for not hiring these people anymore and keeping our spaces safe. So please tune in next Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time at Apollo Performance on Facebook, at Apollo Performance on Instagram, or you can join us here on Zoom. So please, please, please join us then. The other important thing tonight, Shark Tank, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC. Bree and Casey will be there pitching Apollo Performance, hoping for some support from the Sharks. Please watch and tune in. They are repping the dance industry. They're talking about dancers and how to keep us safe and healthy. So please watch that. Cross your fingers, positive vibes to Bree and Casey on a great outcome tonight. We hope it happens for them because they definitely deserve it as a company and as people. So please watch Shark Tank tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC. Until then, we hope that you continue your journey beyond the steps. We will see you next week. Bye bye. Thank you so much, Christina.
Oh, I think
We're still on Zoom.
I
I'm getting
can't
a
hear you.
oh, you can't hear me?